Welcome to the European podcast by Euractiv Poland. My name is Joanna Jakubowska, and in today's interview we'll focus on the European Green Deal and analyze whether the EU is on the right path to achieve climate neutrality by 2050. I have a great honor to host Michael Bloss, who has been a member of the European Parliament since 2019, serving on the Committee on Industry, Research and Energy. He is also the coordinator of the Climate Core Group and shadow reporter for the Industrial Strategy and the European Climate Law for the Greens EFA Group. Hello, Michael. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation.
Hello, thanks a lot for inviting me.
Okay, so let's start with an overview. The European Green Deal, described by Ursula von der Leyen as Europe's new growth strategy, aims to make Europe the first climate-neutral continent by 2050, but also safeguard biodiversity, establish a circular economy, and eliminate pollution, while at the same time boosting the competitiveness of European industry and ensuring a just transition. So it was December 2019 when the EU Green Deal was officially presented. And for me personally, it was a huge moment, full of excitement. So I'm curious if for you it was also the man on the moon moment. And how do you feel about it today, after 2 years?
You described it right. It is a lot of things that the Green Deal wants to achieve. And it's really nice how it sounds. But then if you look into the depth of it, we are not there yet. And it's already 1.5 years past. So I'm feeling it was, when it was presented, it was basically the height of also all of this young people going to the streets. They really wanted to have some change. They were afraid of the climate crisis, and the threat of the climate crisis is still there. And we are getting into the nitty-gritty things. And actually, if you just look what happened the last days, you see that there was an agreement on an agricultural policy that is not anywhere in line with what is needed in terms of climate protection. It actually does not reduce any emissions as such. So it's really weak. We have a climate law that is improving the targets, but analysis from science tells us that it would bring us to a temperature rise between 2 and 3 degrees, and the Paris Agreement tells us it should be much below 2 degrees, actually 1.5 degrees. So yeah, I mean, there is still a lot of work to be done. It becomes clear that it's a very difficult thing, all of this, that it becomes clear that we have political barriers. Some political forces just do not want to be as fast as it is needed for the Paris Agreement. So yeah, we are still in the very beginning of this process.
Okay, so you mentioned the European climate law, and there are some controversies, as you said, regarding this matter. And on the 24th of June, it has been adopted by the European Parliament, and later on also by the Council. And now, if I'm correct, it's waiting to officially enter into force. So it's an important moment for everyone, of course, who follows the path of the European Green Deal. But the Greens weren't very excited about it. So could you explain firstly maybe what is the meaning of the climate law for the Green Deal? And secondly, why the Greens voted against it?
Mm-hmm. So the climate law is quite a central piece of legislation. Basically, the European Union as such is a member of the Paris Agreement, and the climate law should implement the Paris Agreement for the European Union. So that means it says how much greenhouse gases are being reduced in the next 10 years until 2030. And it says that we, as the European Union, want to become climate neutral by the year 2050. That's good now that we have this as a law. It was before already in the Paris Agreement. Now it's union law of the EU. So the problem is just a little bit that if we look onto science, then they are calculating with how much CO2 we can still emit. And they tell us, well, if you want to stay below 2 degrees, you need to have a reduction pace of this amount. And if you want to get to 1.5 degrees, your reduction globally needs to be this and this and this percentage. The problem is that the speed in which we reduce our emissions in Europe actually is not in line with globally us reaching the Paris Agreement, so staying below 2 degrees. And that's for us was very problematic, because in 2021 we only want to vote on something that is actually in line with the Paris Agreement. I mean, therefore we agreed on the Paris Agreement in 2015, and now we should really implement it. So as said, it will bring us to temperature rise of between 2 and 3 degrees. Still, this new improved target now has to be implemented, and it has to be implemented by all of the member states, by different kinds of European legislation. So that's also good. So we will improve and reform a lot of pieces of European legislation, and we hope, and we will fight for this a lot, that during that process we will actually even improve on what is in the target from the climate law, because we actually have already a track record in Europe that the targets, they can be overfulfilled. So we hope that we can overfulfill this target from the climate law. But as such, now we have a framework legislation for climate issues, which consists of these targets, which consists of a process to make a new target for the year 2040, which we will be deciding on in the year 2023. And it consists of also other things like a scientific body that will give recommendations to the European Commission and to the European Parliament and what to improve to be more in line with science. And that's positive, because that's what we want. No, we want to be in line with what science tells us is needed in order to stop global warming to the extent that it will not bring us into deadly temperature rise situations.
I love this positivity at the end. So there's still hope. I'm sure that you have been working hard on making the climate law ambitious. By you, I mean the Greens and also you personally. But I need to ask you very honestly, you're not satisfied with the results. So what went wrong?
No, we in the European Parliament, we actually had a really good result. We wanted to have 60% greenhouse gas reduction until the year 2030. So that would actually have been in line with Paris. We wanted to end fossil subsidies, etc. It's just that what happened in this process, and that's the complexity of European politics and lawmaking, we had a decision of heads of states unanimously in the beginning in December last year. And normally, heads of states should not intervene into legislative processes. They are basically, by the European treaties, obliged to only give guidelines and not come up with kind of very concrete numbers, for instance. But that didn't happen. The heads of state made their deal, and the European Parliament had their more ambitious deal. And then in the lawmaking, we, the European Parliament, have to negotiate with the member states in order to make it a law. And what happened is that we had actually 6 rounds of negotiations, and in these 6 rounds of negotiations, the member states did not move 1 inch from their position. So I thought that was really frustrating, because, in a process of making legislation, we should make compromises. No, I mean, the European Parliament could have moved a little bit towards the member states. The member states could have moved towards the Parliament. But that actually did not happen. The member states stuck to their position. And in the end, actually, they intervened. So, like the negotiators, they were pressured by governments in their home states to give in. And then basically, some groups in the European Parliament could not stand the pressure and actually gave in. So in the end, we just decided on what member states wanted to have unanimously. So that was not the ambition we needed. Now we have a lot more of legislation coming up with this Fit for 2030 package. And in the last council, like European Council with the heads of states were not able to make very detailed prescriptions for these laws. So that gives us much more freedom to then actually have real negotiations and have also the member states moving into our direction. So also wanted to give you another piece of possible hope. So there is still hope that it will be a better process this time than next time.
So before we move to Fit for 55 package, because you already mentioned it, I just wanted to ask you about this goal of reduction by 2030 and 2050. And what I mean specifically is the fact that we use the term net reduction. So could you explain what does net really stand for and why we should be quite worried about it?
So just to put it into a broader context, I mean, what we are concerned with is how much greenhouse gases are emitted to the atmosphere. And we can, or well, not me, but science can then compute in likelihoods how much tons of greenhouse gases will mean so much amount of higher temperatures. That's the climate science. So what we care about is to stick below the 2 degrees because that's the important thing. And what this altogether is calculated in is how much is emitted to the atmosphere and how much is also absorbed from the atmosphere. So this is fair. So what the net means is that we calculate what is emitted and reduce from this what is being absorbed from the atmosphere. So that would be actually a good way to calculate things. Now, what we do with this new net target in the European climate law is that we calculate what we emit to the atmosphere and we reduce from this amount what is already stored in the ecosystem. So, like the CO2 that is stored in the plants, in the forest, etc. This is kind of deducted from what we emit. However, it is not absorbed from the atmosphere at the same time. It's already inside, it's already now in the ecosystem. So it has not a benefit for the climate. So actually the 55% net target now is a real target of 52.8%. So we're a little bit like this, a little bit of calculation tricks. And so that's even that brought my happiness about this law even more down, because even 55% emission reduction is 52.8% in real emission reduction from the atmosphere, what counts for the climate.
Thank you for this explanation. And it's, I think, very important to underline it and bear it in mind that 55% is actually not 55%. But unfortunately, having a long-term goal, 2030, but 2050 as well, is an absolute necessity. But to successfully achieve it, the EU has started working on Fit for 55 package, which you already mentioned. So could you expand on that and explain exactly what does this package contain?
Let me just because you mentioned it now several times, this long-term goal. The climate does not really care about climate neutrality years. It actually only cares about how much tons of CO2 and other greenhouse gases are emitted. So if there's really a difference, we could go down to emitting only little amounts of CO2 and in the next 5 years, and then continue to emit these little amounts and up until the year 2070 or 2100, or we continue to emit a lot until the year 2045 and then go down and emit nothing anymore in the year 2050. The second scenario is much more harmful for the climate than the first scenario. So we have to think really in this budget. So how much are we actually emitting? That's important for the climate, not the year of when we are climate neutral. And that's another thing that normally we wanted to see in the climate law, that we actually calculate now in budgets and not only in years. But that was also something where we have now a slight entrance. The Commission has to publish a budget for the European Union for the year 2030 till 2050, but we wanted to have it a bit more with teeth. So we wanted to have it more obligatory. That did not happen, but we also have because I try to stay positive, we also have an entry point in this direction now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I understand it. It's not about the goal. Of course, it's good to have the destination, but it's more about the path. And I think Fit for 55 package, maybe it is this path that contains all of those probably ambitious projects, but this is a question for you. So could you shed a light on it and tell us what it contains and if we are on the right path?
Yeah, so basically the Fit for 55 package is now the implementation of the climate law. So it means in all of the different sectors where we do emit CO2, there will be new legislation. So we have, for instance, for the area of energy and industry, there is the ETS, the emission trading system on the European level, where you have to pay for emitting 1 ton of CO2. Currently, it's around 50 euros. It's also about transport and cars. So cars will have to have a certain amount of CO2 they're only allowed to emit, new cars. It will also go to the question of heating. So basically our houses, when we warm them up, we emit CO2. So there will be new standards, regulation for newly built houses, that they should be almost passive houses. So they should not need to use any heating anymore. It is about the land, the forests, because they can absorb emissions. So how we are increasing our forest, how we grow our forest, how we make our land better, absorbing more CO2 emissions. So this is also about this. It's about renewable energies, how much renewable energy we will use in the future, and it's about energy efficiency. So about how much energy we'll be able to save in the future. So all of these things will be dealt with in this Fit for 2030 package. So it's really actually quite exciting that there's a lot of things being touched. And now it's just important that we actually have the right policies in all of these different sectors, so that we actually achieve what we want, which is the Paris Agreement.
Wow, yeah, so it's definitely exciting. And looks like we have entered a decisive decade for tackling climate change, hopefully. You mentioned many topics, many projects that are inside of this package. But even though I would love to delve deeper into every single reform, I would like to stick to two topics only and ask you about them. The first one is the ETS, so the emissions trading system. Could you explain what is it exactly? You already said a few words about it, but maybe you could give me a bit broader answer. And why do we need the revision of ETS?
So the ETS, it is the system that covers the energy sector and the industry sector. And if you're from this sector and you want to emit 1 ton of CO2, you have to buy a permit. And these certificates, they are being traded in the emission trading scheme. So it's this market for emission permits. And with limiting the amounts of permits on the market, we can limit the amount of CO2 that is emitted. So basically, the amount of permits is being reduced all the time. And we have price for one permit, and this is currently around 50 euros. What also is happening is actually that most of the industry gets it for free. So they basically, well, they do not have to buy it on the market, but they get this permits for free, whereas on the energy sector, they will have to pay it. Why is it important and why it needs to change? The biggest CO2 emitter in Europe is coal energy. So like if we would reduce emissions from coal energy quickly, that would actually save us a lot, because this is really where the biggest potential is. So if the price for coal energy is higher because they have to pay this CO2 permits, then actually renewable energies become a lot cheaper or competitive, and they enter the market. And therefore it's important. We really need to create an environment for renewable energies to be quickly deployed to the market, to the European Union, because actually they are also cheaper than the other energy sources, and they do not pollute. So, and we do not have to import anything for them. Then on the other hand, it's for the industry. Also here we need to see a change. It takes a lot of money to change a steel plant and make it CO2 free. That's a lot of investment. So also here we need to have a different system for all of these industries to really make the transition to become carbon neutral.
You mentioned coal and the need for a transition, but as we all know, in Poland we have a lot of coal. And what will be the impact of those changes of ETS on countries such as Poland? And not only countries, but also citizens. So should we expect maybe higher electricity prices?
Actually, it's quite interesting to look into Poland's electricity prices, because they are quite high because of some factors. First of all, Polish coal is expensive. So the prices in Poland, there sometimes the electricity prices are really the highest, but it's really because coal is expensive. Then in Poland, you actually import a lot of coal from other countries like Russia. This is also expensive, so you do not use your own resources. We see that gas prices are falling, and we see that also renewables make electricity much cheaper. Why? Because it's a one-time investment. You put up a solar panel on your roof, and then it produces energy without any cost. Whereas, with coal, you always need to have new input, new coal. So if we would have a more rollout of renewable energies in Poland, that would actually make electricity prices cheaper. Problem is just because of political reasons, it's not so much wanted. But I think it would be a really good deal for Polish citizens to use more renewable energy and to phase out more quickly from coal, because as said, it's very expensive for everyone.
Yes, exactly. But I think we can already slowly, and maybe not so slowly, observe the deployment of renewables also in Poland.
And you have great potential. I mean, the coast, now I know that there's a lot of projects plans for offshore wind, but also, I mean, we are now discussing about mandatory solar rooftops. And I think if you look into Poland, there's a lot of possibilities also for solar. So if in Poland this opportunity is being taken, I think it will be really a big boost for the whole economy. It will create a lot of jobs, and you are not so much, dependent on imports coming from Russia.
Yes, exactly. Let's just, oh God, so many times hope was mentioned here. But moving on to the second topic that I wanted to talk about, that is also inside of the 55 Fit for 55 package, and it is carbon border adjustment mechanism. So it's maybe quite difficult for some listeners, maybe not all of them are familiar with this name. So could you shed a light on this mechanism and explain to our listeners how it will solve the problem of so-called carbon leakage?
Okay, so what carbon leakage means that we believe when we would have very high prices for CO2 emission, then companies would just go to, like places outside of the European Union, produce their steel or their chemical products there, and then ship it to the European Union. So that's not what we want. No, we want to keep industry in Europe, and we want to green industry in Europe. So we need to somehow figure out how we stop them from moving away, but at the same time give them an incentive to change. Currently, as said, they get all of their emission permits for free, so they do not really have price signal that tells them you have to change, because they don't pay the CO2 price. If we protect them from the outside, so we basically say it's a little bit like a tariff. If we will import a ton of steel, and then the tariff is charged according to the CO2 footprint. So steel from China with high CO2 footprint is being charged a lot, so that when it enters the European market, there's no disadvantage for European steel that is then with low carbon footprint, but with the higher prices. So in this way, we balance out, we protect European industry to the outside world, and help them to decarbonize and to change. So that's I think a really important tool, because the industry, especially energy intensive industry, is the most difficult ones to transform. It costs a lot of money, but still it needs to be done. But I think it's not the only thing that we can do. It needs to be protected to the outside world with this carbon border adjustment mechanism, but also it needs to get more support than this, for instance, guaranteed prices for renewable products. So, like I guarantee companies that if they want to sell 1 ton of CO2 free steel, they will be guaranteed this amount of money. And I think that's also another incentive we need to have. This kind of, we call it climate contracts.
Okay, so very important tool, but sounds like also very complicated tool, because we are talking about, as you said, the outside world of the European Union. So there are also rules, for example, World Trade Organization rules, and I was wondering if carbon border adjustment mechanism comply with WTO rules.
Mhm. So what the World Trade Organization tells us is that we are not allowed to basically have double protection mechanisms for one product. So if we protect the product with a carbon border adjustment, we cannot protect it at the same time, for instance, with giving this free allowances. So this basically is the requirement. And the idea of the carbon border adjustment is that the free allowances are being phased out and the carbon border adjustment is phased in. So they are not protecting it double. So therefore, it should be compatible with WTO rules. And I'm quite positive that it will actually work.
Okay, so we should expect plenty of reforms in upcoming months, years, in probably every single European sector. But I was also wondering if, in your point of view, there is any issue that could harm the achievement of the 55%, not so 55% anymore, as you explained, goal, and also full net neutrality by the mid-century.
I mean, there's a lot of possibilities not to achieve this. It starts with the question of our forests. Like I'm in Poland, as the same as in Germany, the forests are under a lot of pressure, a lot of stress. A lot of trees are dying. Yeah, there's the stress. There is diseases. So what we're trying to do is actually to build up our forests, and that would also, we would need to achieve the 55% with building up our forests. We're not yet sure even if we can keep our forests and trees. So that's like the second thing is, of course, the question of actually, do we get as many renewables as we need to have? And the last thing is, do we get fuel switch from coal to gas? But then in the end, gas is also a fossil energy. And if we now build a lot of gas power plants and soon they should not run anymore because we want to become fully carbon neutral, that will be a problem. So there will be investments and investments should yield. So we should actually try to create this change in a way that we go from coal to renewable energies as much as possible. So currently we see, for instance, that the gas lobby is trying to fight that we will have a lot of blue hydrogen. So hydrogen that is produced from fossil gas that then is used, for instance, for heating your house or for running your car or so. And I think this is all false solutions, because then you still have fossil gas. You actually have a lot of methane leakage that is very problematic for climate. And we do not really understand how to make actually blue hydrogen, so how to store CO2 in the ground. So there's a lot of problematic ways currently, as the industry and a lot of people, they say, okay, the next thing is gas. And basically we Greens say, no, the next thing is first, we need to save energy consumption, so be more energy efficient. Second, we need to build renewables. And if we take the wrong pathway, it's really not clear for me whether we will be on track.
At the end, I wanted to put here a quote of Barack Obama,
Great.
who once said, "We are the first generation to feel the effect of climate change and the last generation who can do something about it." So, do you think that the EU, and by that I mean not only politicians, are doing something about it and are on the right path to achieve the Paris Agreement's goal?
I think what we saw actually, and this really on a positive note, is really amazing in terms of young people going to the streets in millions, and they changed the way politics worked and they set the agenda, and they basically made it possible that now we are discussing about how do we become climate neutral. And that's really, really great. And I believe that this young generation is growing up and they will now become also more influential. They will be in decision-making positions. And therefore, I truly believe that we will be able to make it. But like, policies that are in place currently or that we discuss currently, they're not yet there. But we still, can change them in the future. And I believe we will change them in the future. So yes, we are the last generation. Actually, it's not one generation. I have a daughter, and I believe, okay, in 2050, she will be only 30 years old. So it's actually not a lot of time. but it's the next 30 years. They are absolutely crucial, and I believe at some point we will be faster than we think we can be, because there will be just so many people thinking about new solutions. There will be creative minds that come up with technologies. There will be discussions about how we change our patterns of consumption, and this all together gives me hope that we will make it. Now, after all, it's a question of survival, and we as the human beings, we are good in surviving. So I hope this time it also works.
Yeah, I want to say that's the best possible end of this conversation, this interview. Let's hope for the best. And I think collective action and activism, especially of the youth, is crucial here. So thank you again for accepting our invitation for the interview. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening. This was the European podcast by Euractiv Poland. You can access more episodes on our website, Spotify, SoundCloud, Apple Podcast, and Google Podcast. And don't forget to join our newsletter to stay up to date with new episodes.